Reading the IPCC report in summer of last year, and I'm kind of generally a reasonably optimistic person, but when you read that we have this limited amount of time, and then you understand what the impact of those temperature rises will be on us, it's hard to stay hopeful. And in the last few months, for me, hope has returned, and everything feels possible again, whereas it didn't before. And I want to credit that hope that I feel to the youth climate strikers. I mean, I'd actually like to call them a youth movement, because for me, when I saw those students on the streets, particularly that key turning point of the Australian students coming out on the streets in December of last year, faced down by Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, who told those students to get back to school and learn about mining and engineering, and told them to be less activist. And I must admit, my very favourite banner of the many brilliant banners on those school student strikes was, to Scott Morrison, "We'll be less activist if you would be less shit." And I thought that kind of summed it up. And I'd like to credit that hope to the school students. Global youth movement. And for me, it's a youth movement. You know, a la the 1960s. You know, those youth movements of the 60s that led and fought and dragged in other layers of society, showing us that it was possible, that change was possible. Dream the impossible, I think is what they said in the 1960s. I was around, but very tiny. And I also want to credit Extinction Rebellion for bringing back that hope, because there is no doubt about it, those last 2 weeks that we have experienced, 9 days of holding those key parts of London, have transformed like a social movement does. In a short space of time, things happen that previously have taken years. The education, the understanding that there is in society now of a climate crisis and the inaction of politicians has happened in the last few weeks, and for that we have to give thanks, because we've brought hope back, and the impossible now seems possible again. But clearly our job now, as people have referred in all kinds of different ways, is to deepen that movement, to deepen its roots, to deepen its base, and to deepen its understanding. So I want to just add a couple of thoughts in here. One of the things that happens, particularly a new movement like this, is it does throw up questions. And unless those questions are answered, then obviously, the movement can, we're early days, but it's important that important questions are answered. I think one of the most important questions that have been thrown up in the last few days for many people, and I thought it when people were debating what was happening with the police. People were debating, why are the police not going in? It may be because of the wonderful way that the Extinction Rebellion rebels responded to the police, but I have to say, I'm kind of seeing how the police have reacted to social movements in the past. Exactly. I was thinking about, 2011, when the young people across London were on the streets, in anger at the austerity that they were facing. There was a very different reaction from the police that took the riots in 2011. So I kind of feel that the response to the action of the police was actually because they were cautious. Because there is huge public support for what was happening on the streets, and they were frightened that if they'd gone in hard, that's my feeling, they would have deepened the movement. They would have built its base by many people coming in to support what was happening and be willing to step up, etc., etc. Now, I think one of the biggest questions that's been posed is this. What's the block? If we have a climate emergency, why aren't we doing something about it? What is the block? And I don't know if people saw the David Attenborough programme, but I thought the David Attenborough programme was absolutely fantastic. And more so when you watch a programme like that in the context of a social movement like this. I can imagine that programme coming out and not making the impact that it has made. But this time it makes a bigger impact because it's in the context of a big social movement. Attenborough said this. in the programme. What's holding us back? The fossil fuel corporations. It was a very good and very important section in that programme that talked about the way the fossil fuel corporations have lobbied government, have spread disinformation, etc., which has held it back. They have a disproportionate power in society, and that question is going to be asked. What are we going to do to tackle that disproportionate power? How are we going to stop those people from blocking us from the action that we need to take on climate change? And I think it's a question that we have to answer in the movement. I'm going to make a couple of other points. Which is why, by the way, it's fantastic what's happened, but I do want to salute the anti-fracking movement, because they have stood up against the expansion of the fossil fuel industry in this country. It's really, really important that we recognise we have a wonderful leap forward in our movement, but there's some important work has already been done and has already taken us further forward. I want to salute the people, for example, who are outside Drax last week at the Drax AGM, who are quite rightly saying this huge government subsidy to expand gas and to expand biofuels in this country will lead us down the wrong path. Now, the second point I want to make is this: the climate emergency impacts us all, but it doesn't impact us all equally. And those who have contributed the least are suffering the worst and are suffering the biggest impacts. In the poorest countries of the world who have contributed the least, it is the greatest impact that they are experiencing and that they will experience. We mentioned briefly at the beginning of the meeting Mozambique, and Claire mentioned a second cyclone on its way. The contribution of African nations to the climate crisis, to the existing climate, is negligible, non-existent. And yet look at what they're experiencing, the legacy of those emissions. There's a second crisis they're facing, by the way, which is cholera. So as a result of the impact of that cyclone, there is now cholera. It's a Victorian concept, is it not? Spreading across Africa. And the poorest people in the richest parts of the world are also the people that suffer the greatest. And do contribute the least, by the way. We're not all super rich, frequent flyers, flying around the world, contributing on the same scale to the climate crisis. I do want to say this: the solutions to the climate crisis have to recognise that. The solutions to the climate crisis cannot be ones that repeat and reinforce that inequality in society. The solutions to the climate crisis cannot be ones that pass the buck again to those who have contributed least. I want to just flag up the question of biofuels. Biofuels is not a solution to our crisis. Biofuels will be a huge land grab over the poorest parts of the world in order to produce fuels which actually do not solve the climate crisis. But I want to just come back, therefore, to closer to home. If the poorest people in the richest part of the world also contribute the least to the climate crisis, then the solutions, Alex was referring to it, have to be solutions which do not negatively impact on those people who have suffered the most and contributed the least. And therefore, there is a debate in the new movement, and you are, at the front you spoke earlier, you're absolutely right to flag it up when you mentioned that some unions have thrown their weight behind things that cause a problem in terms of our climate crisis. Unite, GMB, Unison support for investment in fuels. They call it an energy mix, which I think is really problematic, because it doesn't allow us to make the changes that we need to make quickly enough. But yeah, there is a debate to be had in the union movement. Now, I think, that debate can be won, because we can put forward solutions that actually transform our society, allow us to live better lives, and provide more jobs. So it is not the case that just transition is a fluffy concept. Just transition is a real concept, because the jobs that we need to create the economy that can reduce our emissions could be real, well-paid, well-organised jobs, etc., etc. I want to just flag up for Alex, and I'm completely behind the Green New Deal. This publication here, 1 Million Climate Jobs, where we've been arguing for quite some period of time about how jobs can be created, and the concept of a national climate service, The market's failed us here. The market hasn't been able to solve the climate crisis. We need a national climate service that can intervene to identify where do those jobs need to be created? How do we rapidly reduce the emissions in our economy in a way where actually, you know, for some people, you know, their lives are lacking in growth, to be honest with you. You know, this is the government that's given us austerity. This is the government that's kept people's homes cold. We need investment that will keep people's homes warm, etc., etc. So I want to finish up on this, on the question of the general strike. I think we have to start campaigning for a general strike. We have to show that we stand in solidarity with the school strikes. We have to show that we stand in solidarity with the trade union movement. With the Extinction Rebellion and with a broader climate movement. That's not that we should be raising abstract slogans. We have to take this seriously. It's real. You know, we're fighting for it. And you know what? Within the trade union movement, you know, things change and can change very, very quickly. People make leaps in history, and that's what we've seen in the last few months. People can make leaps in history. What you can bet your bottom dollar is, if we do not put this argument, we are not going to move forward. And that vacuum will be filled within the trade union movement and broader in society. And it will be filled by people who are saying this. I love it. There is a climate crisis, Michael Gove. I can hear it now. Yeah. We stand with you, Michael Gove said to the school student strikers. We stand with you, as agreed to meet Extinction Rebellion. You know, but we'll suggest that maybe we can't make the transition as quickly as we want to make it, because that will mean closing down all of the gas boilers in everybody's homes, and then people will get cold. And you know, we don't want to do this to our pensions, etc. By this way, this is from the government that gave us austerity. You know, who are full of hypocrisy, who are full of crap on this stuff. So we do have to start putting that argument now, and we have to do more than that. If we win the argument, this is fantastic. If we need more debate, then we give it more debate. But we have to deliver something on the day of May the 24th, and we have to stand in solidarity with the school students and with the wider climate movement. There are two traditions in the trade union movement. I'm going to finish on this. Solidarity or sectionalism. Internationalism or nationalism, democratic control or prioritising big business interests, believing that's the only way to create jobs, etc. You can see where we need to stand with internationalism, with solidarity, for democratic control. And in the anti-capitalist movement, we used to say, we have a world to win. Well, it's very clear now that we've got a world to lose. So we really need to get stuck in and deliver the solidarity needed to transform that world.